What's up, guys? It's Tony here. Welcome back to Tony's Hockey Spaces. Like the third time I've made this video today. I can't figure it out. I just can't figure it out, right? I've tried to do this, and it's just, every year, it's almost like when you psych yourself out, right? You look at it too much, and then you just start seeing things that aren't there. Maybe I'm just schizophrenic, but I don't know. Today, I'm going to be predicting who I think is going to win each round in the Stanley Cup Playoffs. I have notes. Let me get those up. Very bad notes. Notes that might not make sense. Notes that I wrote for 2 hours last night that aren't very coherent. And then I, led to a very terrible, probably not going to happen Stanley Cup final. So here we go. The theme of this year's Stanley Cup Playoffs is it's the same thing that we have seen every year in the East, and everything I always think is going to happen in the West never happens. Last year I had the Oilers getting to the final and winning over Boston. Those were two terrible predictions. I mean, Edmonton was, I think those were two decent predictions. Everyone was saying that at the time, but then Edmonton lost to Vegas. Boston lost to the Panthers in the first round, so I don't know. Every year, I'm just bad at this. I'm just so bad at making brackets, so it's just, quite frankly, it's going to be a miracle if this is all right this year. So I'm going to, take a deep breath and then try to portray confidence that I think I know what this year's bracket is going to hold. So here we go. The East is literally the same thing we've seen every year since 2019. Maybe a little bit further back. The Rangers and Capitals haven't played in quite a while, but every time the Rangers have played the Capitals, it's been the same result. The Rangers have won the series every single time. Not a question. Different Rangers team. Better Rangers team. Different Capitals team. Worse Capitals team. People have, kind of said, oh, it would be so funny if the Capitals won this series. The Florida Panthers last year were a team that won the President's Trophy. They dealt with a couple injuries, or not last year, but the year before that. In the offseason, they dealt with a couple injuries. The new team was gelling together. They, kind of squeaked into a playoff spot. But they were a good hockey team, right? They won games when they had to down the stretch. Washington is in the playoffs because no team in the East from, what would it be, the 9th seed down to like the 12th seed could win games when it counted. And I'm counting Buffalo in that. Buffalo had a chance at the end to do the funniest thing ever and make the playoffs, and they couldn't win when it mattered. They were close. They were within 4 points late in the season. Flyers were third in the Metro, blew that. Red Wings had a really good chance. They blew that. Penguins came on strong at the end, but they sucked at the beginning, and that cost them. So Washington is the, by default, wild card team. One team had to make that spot. That's the only reason the Capitals are in the playoffs. I'm going Rangers. President's Trophy curse doesn't say anything about the first round. It's just funny when it happens. But remember, Florida got to the second round when they won the President's Trophy, and then they lost there. Same with Colorado in 21. When they won the President's Trophy, they got to the second round and lost to Vegas. Both good, they were both good teams. They lost to good teams as well. Last year was just funny. When Tampa lost to Columbus, that was just funny. But sometimes when the President's Trophy winner loses in the playoffs, it's not really funny. It's just, they got bested by a better team. Again, it's all the same. These are the same matchups. These are easier to predict because we've seen these matchups before quite recently. There's not really anything different about these teams, right? I mean, Tampa is a little worse. Florida is a little better than they were a couple years ago. But fun fact, an Atlantic Division team has not gone to the Stanley Cup final since the Pittsburgh Penguins in 2008. Team that wins the Atlantic in the regular season hasn't gotten to the final. I'm talking about The first seed from that division, right? They're the favorites to at least get to the conference final. And then they play a Metro team, and you would think, even if the first seed got there a quarter of a time, you would think one time in the last 16 years, the first seed in the Atlantic would have gotten to the Stanley Cup final. Hasn't happened. I'm picking Tampa. Tampa always beats Florida. It doesn't matter what team they throw out on the ice. They could throw out a team of, I don't even care, Paul Bissonnette and Ryan Whitney out there, and they'd still find a way to get to the final. That was a joke. Sorry. Boston against Toronto. What are we talking about here? Carolina versus the Islanders. This is just such a boring series, and we have to sit through this again. This series makes me glad that I have to work on weekends, because if I had to sit down and watch this series every day, or at least waste my weekend with watching this series, I would cry. I would have to just become an NBA fan. After all these years, I would just have to call it quits on hockey. Thankfully, I have work on the weekends, so I don't have to sit there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday when I could be going out and having fun and, but my obligation to watching the playoffs says you should stay home and watch the series just in case it winds up being a good series, just in case it goes to 7 and then goes to overtime in Game 7. I don't even get to make that decision this year because I have work. I've never been happier to have work in my life. I do not want to watch this series. Carolina wins every year. What are we even talking about here? I'll say 6 for that series, 5 for the Rangers. Ovi will carry the Caps to 1 game, Boston always wins in 7. This is kind of funky because Tampa is not the same team. I say this goes to 7, but I say they win in 7 this time. They beat Florida in 4 a couple years ago. Before that, they beat them in 6. So we'll say 7. Out west, you see, the West is interesting, right? The West is basically, you've got 2 matchups that have happened a lot recently, but they're different. This one is easy, so we'll just say Edmonton because I'm not even going to spend my time with that one. But these three are, well, forget this one. These 2 are both good matchups because Vegas has, in all likelihood, Mark Stone coming off LTIR. Dallas is very good. They have proven time and time again they are very good. The first seed in the Western Conference has been to the final the last 2 seasons and has won the final the last 2 seasons. They're always in the mix when it's late. The Eastern Conference is a bit of a laughing stock because it's always like, the number 1 seed is out in the first round. The West isn't like that. The West, you get good teams playing in the conference final at like 9:30 at night when nobody on the East Coast can watch them. So go figure, because that's just my luck. Dallas and Vegas is a very good series. This is going to be a tough series. This is probably going to go 6 or 7. Dallas is better than they were last year when they lost to Vegas. Vegas is worse than they were last year, but they're still Vegas. Like, Vegas is a team that has trotted out a bunch of different players every year, bunch of different combinations, and every year they seem to get at least to the conference final. The question for Vegas Golden Knights is, what type of goaltending do they get in the postseason? Because Adin Hill was a little rocky this year. How healthy are Mark Stone, obviously, who's probably coming off LTIR, William Carrier, Alex Pietrangelo were all day-to-day, Chandler Stevenson. How healthy are these guys, right? Because if they're going at 80%, you're going to need a bigger wagon to carry a team past Dallas. So I'm going to say Dallas, knowing full well that Vegas is going to win this series. Winnipeg and Colorado. This is the best series of the postseason, and I am so glad that this series kicks off at 7 o'clock on Sunday. And let's see, do they show the games here? No, I guess they don't show the games here. They just show all these stats. This series is a matter of Winnipeg's defense against Colorado's offense. And goaltending-wise, Winnipeg takes the cake. Not even close. Hellebuck is amazing. Georgiev struggled at times this year. He led the NHL in wins, I think, at the end of the season, but, he's kind of been inconsistent. The last week or so, Colorado's been very inconsistent. They beat an Edmonton team that didn't dress 7 of their top 8 leading scorers. They blew them out last night, but before that, they were getting blown out by, nobody teams. And then Winnipeg, they got blown out by Winnipeg, who they're literally facing in the first round. So, this is a very tough one. But I see Colorado, to be honest with you, a lot like I see the Washington Capitals. They won their cup after years of just choking in the same round over and over again. They won their cup, and now they're going to regress heavily. The Capitals was the same thing. The Capitals, they won their cup. They lost to the Canes the next year. Canes were a wild card team the next year, by the way. And then they lost in 2020 early on. They lost I don't even think they made the playoffs in 21. I don't know. But I see Colorado the same way that I see Washington. They won their cup. It's downhill from here. I'm going Winnipeg. I can't believe that we have to sit through this bull crap. Just look at this. Just look at this right here. Look at 4,064 kilometers. I'm not Canadian. What is that in miles? If I flip it around, can I get it in miles, please? Well, my computer won't load, so I guess not. These are just, it's a 6-hour flight. For God's sake, it's 2,500 miles. They're 2,500 miles apart. They're not, look at Nashville, right? Look at Nashville, and then look at, hold on, it's my computer sucks. Look at where Nashville is compared to Florida. This isn't very far off, right? Nashville is the easternmost Western Conference team. They beat Chicago, and they gotta fly here 2,500 miles. That's just ridiculous. That's just, they do, and forget it. These teams, they just don't care about each other, right? They play each other 3 times a year. What difference does it make, It's not a rivalry. Nashville's hot going into the playoffs. Vancouver is, they're a good team, but they've been known to drop games against teams that aren't as good. They are getting there. I think Rick Tocchet is the Jack Adams Award winner, without a doubt. But I got to go with Nashville. Nashville's just a good team. Edmonton versus LA. I'll say that LA gets it to 7 at least this year. Make it a little more heart-wrenching for Kings fans before the rebuild, which is going to happen pretty soon, mark my words. Nashville and Vancouver, I don't know. 6. Winning on home ice in Nashville. Winnipeg and Colorado. That, I don't know. That would be a cool 7-game series, but I see it as a 6-game series. This Dallas-Vegas series has 7 games written all over it, so that's that. Second round, Tampa and Boston. Again, these are the same teams. These are the same teams that face each other every year. Fun fact, a wild card team has made it to the conference final 4 out of the last 5 years. Out of the 2 remaining wild card teams, who is more likely to win this round? Nashville versus Edmonton? Probably not. I'm going to say Edmonton. Tampa versus Boston? Tampa's sneaky good. I'm going to say Tampa. Rangers and Hurricanes. Now, this is tough, right? This is a tough one. Because I gotta think like the NHL for a second here. I'm not saying the NHL is rigged, right? But if the NHL could decide who they want to win this series, would they rather it be a team that has a fan base that is devoted and very active, or a Southern team that has been at it for multiple years and has built a fan base but hasn't gotten to the final in a long time. 18 years is a long time. I'm going to be wrong. I know I'm going to be wrong, but it's just a fact of life. I mean, everything just points, like, talent-wise, everything just points to the Rangers winning this series. Talent-wise. Better goaltending. Defense, Carolina takes a cake, but offensively, are they going to be able to, hold up versus Panarin, Zibanejad, Kreider, the big names that the Rangers have had for years? Are they going to be physical enough to withstand guys like Rempe and who's the guy that leads that team in hits? It's I forget his name. It's not Hedel, but it's like Cooley. Cooley's the guy that's like fourth in hits in the NHL. Are they going to be able to match that? Probably not. Rangers, talent-wise, look like they're going to win this series. But, President's Trophy curse, the NHL would like to build a Southern market. Carolina is very hungry. They haven't won in a while. New York is very, I don't know. They've got a fan base. I don't think the NHL is going to try to do them any favors. I'm going to say Carolina. That's that. I already said the Oilers. This one is just, it's Edmonton is just different this year. They finally have goaltending, so it's like, Saros is good, but like it's not really about goaltending if the Oilers have just high-flying offense and suffocating defense, at times suffocating defense, but, Nashville just doesn't have it. It's not in the cards for Nashville. Plus, Edmonton is a team that plays a lot like Pittsburgh, and I know that the Predators didn't have a lot to play for it, and I'm talking about how the Penguins used to play, right? How they played the other day. The Penguins were very fast. They were very much in your face. They peppered Saros with shots on goal. Saros kept them in that game, but they looked like an AHL team against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was running laps around them. They got lucky that game wasn't 7-2. It was only 4-2. Edmonton is better than Pittsburgh. Edmonton is faster than Pittsburgh. It's not in the cards for Nashville. It's just not in the cards for them. They had a great run, 18-game point streak. Don't discredit them, but to say this team is going to get to the final, to win the final, I just don't see it. You just have such better teams in the Western Conference. I mean, even if it winds up being LA and Nashville, I would pick LA over Nashville. Because they're just better. Cam Talbot has great numbers this season. Better than Yusei Saros. Saros is great. Saros has probably has been better over the last few seasons than Talbot, but Talbot has been incredible this year. Defensively, LA is amazing. They're I think the best defensive team in the NHL. They allow the fewest goals, or at least they're one of the teams that allows, they're top 5 in goals against average. Offensively, they're good enough. They've got Fiala, they've got Pierre-Luc Dubois, they've got, so even if it winds up being LA, I don't know. I don't see it. I don't see it for Nashville. Not to mention Kopitar, Kempe, the big ones for LA. This is a series I really want to see. This series, I think, is going to decide who gets to the Stanley Cup final. And again, I know I picked the Canadian team here, but who has the fan base? Winnipeg. Which market are they still trying to grow? Dallas has a lot of fans. Don't get me wrong, that stadium is loud. But hockey in the South seems to be the goal for the NHL. I think they'll do, I think the NHL will do, you've got to have a Canadian team in the conference final, right? The choices, the top 2 seeds are Vancouver and Edmonton. One of them has to get to the conference final. if LA is in the conference final, I'm buying a plane ticket and I'm going to the parade, because if LA is in the conference final, they're winning the cup. Dallas and Winnipeg, I don't think there's anything that Winnipeg has that Dallas doesn't, and I think Hellebuck is going to win the Vezina, but in the playoffs, Hellebuck has been great. He's probably one of the better playoff goaltenders to not have gone to the Stanley Cup final. He's very similar to Carey Price in that regard. Price is obviously a lot better of a goaltender over his career. But Ottinger is also really good. This one is tough. This one is really tough for me. This is what I'll say. If Winnipeg hadn't had to deal with injuries around the middle of the season, in January and February, they would have probably won the President's Trophy. They went on a losing streak right when they were losing everybody. Everybody was getting injured. Everybody's healthy now for Winnipeg. They're going to play guys at 80%, 70%, 60%. If they can. If they're able to get on the ice, they're going to play those guys. The big name players in Winnipeg. Not that there are many in Winnipeg, but, they're going to play their big guys. They're going to play Scheifele. They're going to play Schmidt. They're going to play the guys that you would expect them to play. So I got to go with Winnipeg. I expect to be wrong. I expect Dallas is going to win the series. I just can't see it. I see Winnipeg, when healthy, I see Winnipeg as the best team in the league. I think Winnipeg is better than the Rangers, who won the President's Trophy. I think they're better than the Bruins, who are always a playoff contender. I think they're better than the Panthers. I think the Jets are the best team in the NHL. They're better than the Oilers. And this series is really interesting to me, right? Because it's two Canadian teams. It's two teams that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be in the conference final, given how much the NHL has been against Canadian teams for whatever reason getting this far. But, Montreal got to the final a couple years ago. They were a terrible regular season team. They wouldn't have made the playoffs if it weren't for the divisions. In my notes, I say Oilers in 7. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about this series. The past 2 years, the team that has won the Stanley Cup out of the West has been the team that was able to outscore their problems. Before that, you couldn't buy a Stanley Cup final appearance if you didn't have a top 5 goalie in the league, right? 2022 was the first year that changed. 21 in the final, you had Vasilevsky and Price, right? Even last year, you had Bobrovsky and then Adin Hill was hot. You get at least one top 5 goalie in the NHL in the Stanley Cup final every year. Last year was Bobrovsky. Year before that, it was Vasilevsky. The 3 years before that, it was Vasilevsky. Binnington was hot in 19. Remember, he went on a crazy run in 19. Holtby, amazing in 18. Matt Murray, amazing in the playoffs in 16 and 17. You even go back to, the days of the Blackhawks and Kings dynasties. Corey Crawford, probably Hall of Fame goaltender. Jonathan Quick, amazing. Jonathan Quick carried his team to 2 cups, at least the first one. It's written in the stars, right? You got to have a great goaltender to get into the final. Or at least you have to be able to outscore your problems. Can Edmonton outscore their problem in net. I'm not saying Skinner is a bad goalie, but he's not really a great goalie. He's very, amongst these 8 teams that are in the playoffs in the West, he's probably about 5th on this list, right? I mean, I would give, like, Ottinger is better, Hellebuck is better, Thatcher Demko is better, Cam Talbot is better. I would say Yusei Saros is better. I think he beats out Georgiev. So if it winds up being, and this is why I have Winnipeg beating the Avalanche, but, if Edmonton winds up playing the Avalanche in the conference final again, rematch of 2022, I will say Edmonton. Because at that point, you're just throwing the playbook out the window. There are no goalies in the conference final. You're just scoring 7, 8, 9 goals a night. Maybe, potentially. Out of these teams, though, like, I can't see Skinner being better than any of these goalies except for Georgiev. Right? Like, Ottinger, amazing playoff goaltender. Adin Hill won a Stanley Cup last year. Hellebuck, amazing goalie, regular season and postseason. Thatcher Demko has proven himself again and again. He's a great goaltender. Cam Talbot, one of the best goalies in the NHL this year. And I still have Edmonton beating LA, but that's because of their high-flying offense. And between Hellebuck and Talbot, like if the conference final here were LA and Winnipeg, I would still take Winnipeg. So I'm picking Winnipeg here. Because Hellebuck he deserves to be in a final. He definitely deserves to be in a final. This, for him, I think, is his Carey Price year. Carey Price in 2021 had never been to a Stanley Cup final. That was the first year they were in the final. He willed his team to a final. I am wagering a giant bet on Winnipeg getting here. But there is no perfect bracket in the West. So I got to commit to a theme. My theme is Hellebuck finally gets to the final. In the East, this is interesting. If this winds up being the matchup, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Some people might because they don't like the Lightning because they've been to the final 3 times in the last 4 years. They've been to the conference final over and over again. I think in this series, it comes down to defense. And, the last 2 years, I'm going to be wrong about this. I know I'm going to be wrong about this, but I feel like the last 2 years were a fluke. The Avalanche were able to outscore their problems, right? Darcy Kemper was just good enough to win a Stanley Cup. Adin Hill was just good enough for Vegas to win a Stanley Cup. The team in the East with the best defense and goaltending combination usually gets to the final. At least that's been the case the last several years. I mean, I don't remember back to 2019 if there was a better defense than Boston, but I could tell you Bobrovsky and Vasilevsky have been the 2 best goaltenders out of the East for a while, except the 1 year Shesterkin was really good. But, it's a little different now. It's a little different because Carolina they haven't won it before. They're very hungry. This needs to be the year for Carolina. There is incredible urgency in Carolina. They have to win the Stanley Cup this year. I don't know about this one. I would think Tampa, because I would not bet against Tampa, but they don't have really a lot to play for that they haven't accomplished before. So, I'm going to be wrong. I know I'm going to be wrong. I'm going to say Carolina. In the final, see, this is what's funny. 2 seeds haven't played each other in the Stanley Cup final, I think, since Pittsburgh and San Jose, I want to say, in 2016. Because I think everybody since then was either a 1 or 3 seed. I think there was only 1 2 seed that went to the final in that little period. I gotta give it to Winnipeg. I gotta say, I mean, I know that a Canadian team winning the cup is like sacrilege in the NHL, but I think they're the most well-rounded team in the NHL. And again, I think this is a year of Connor Hellebuyck. And the goaltending for Carolina is just suspect enough. I don't necessarily completely trust Pyotr Kochetkov. I think he's a great goalie, might lead his team to the final. Carolina was another one of those teams that started off slow, but then once they found it, they were a wagon. I can't see a team other than Winnipeg winning the cup thinking rationally. Because this is a team that has gone on 2 long winning streaks, one of which is going on right now. They've won 7 straight. Earlier in the season, they had a 9-game win streak, I think. 9 or 10 games. If they had stayed healthy the whole season, they would have won the President's Trophy. They would have at least won the Western Conference in the regular season. I think they have an advantage because they're the underdogs. So no one really expects them to win the Stanley Cup final. No one's really paying attention much to Winnipeg, right? If they were the President's Trophy winners, people would be eyeing them as the target. They're not really the target. They're kind of the aggressors in this situation. Plus, aside from great goaltending, very physical, depth scoring offensively. I think they're the most well-rounded team in this year's playoffs. I think they have everything. They have a good coach. They have Rick Bowness as a head coach. He guided the Stars to the Stanley Cup final a few years ago. He's always gotten his team to that level. He's a great coach. This is a great team that has been slept on so much this season. I would be surprised if they didn't at least make the conference final. If they lost to Dallas, that would surprise me. It'll be a great series if that's what it winds up being, but it would surprise me if they didn't wind up in the conference final. They're better than Dallas. This team is better than Dallas. If they had stayed healthy the whole season, absolutely. They're winning the Western Conference. Not even a question. The injuries, they went on a losing streak, but when they've been healthy, they've just been amazing. So this is my team. This series, I hope, goes to 7 games, but more realistically, it'll probably end in 6. It's not going to be really a high-scoring series because Carolina's great defensively, and Winnipeg is also great defensively and has an amazing goaltender. So, I don't know. Let's say, a 6-game series, on average, probably 6 goals a game. I'll add one because there's got to be, an extra goal scored for a team if that winds up being the case. So I'll say 37 here. That's my bracket. Winnipeg Jets over the Carolina Hurricanes. There is no easy answer here, right? I could see the Rangers breaking the President's Trophy curse because it's not like they have much of a target on their back. At least they don't play like it. They didn't have the regular season that Boston did last year. So, they're kind of President's Trophy winners by default. They weren't that much further ahead of Carolina or Dallas or even Boston or Florida. I could see the Rangers winning it all. I could see pretty much Florida, Boston, New York, Carolina, all the first seeds in the East. Out of the West, the only teams I can really see are Winnipeg, Dallas. That's it. That's pretty much it. LA isn't there yet. LA will be there. But they're going to have to figure it out soon because Kopitar and Doughty are getting old. They're going to retire soon. So they got to figure it out in LA. That's all for this video. Thank you guys very much for watching. This is a long one. 36 minutes to make my picks. Oh my god. Anyways, I'm going to do my podcast thing after every round. Just kind of talk about each round. So we'll see. how everybody fares. Stanley Cup Playoffs kick off tomorrow. It's going to be a fun one. Going to be a fun Stanley Cup Playoffs. I hope. I hope it's just better than last year. Last year was boring. Last year sucked. It was just blowouts. Every game was a blowout. Stanley Cup Final was a blowout. 9-3? 9-3 in the Stanley Cup Final. Ridiculous. We need a better final. We need a good final. We need a series that's tied at 2 in the Stanley Cup Final going into Game 5. At the very least. Of course, I want to see a Game 7 overtime winner, but I don't know. We'll see. See you after the first round.